What's up guys, Jayztwocents here, and I haven't done a video like this in about 6 years where I'm gonna specifically talk about power draw. It's an argument we've seen over and over and over. Get blah 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 company because yada yada company is gonna cost you more in the long run in terms of power consumption. We're gonna talk today specifically about various graphics cards and CPUs, especially with the way the CPU market is heating up. No pun intended, actually things are kind of getting cooler, well, at least for AMD. Intel's kind of getting hot, but that's besides the point. We're gonna talk about how much money it may cost you to get one brand over the other and whether or not that should even be a factor in your buying decisions. I almost said buying purchases. You usually purchase your bias. With its aluminum bezel, solid construction, and adjustable base, the vast 35-inch ultra-wide 100Hz VA panel from Massdrop offers performance at an affordable price. Learn more about this drop by following the link in the description below. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, and the unfortunate thing about this test versus the one I did 6-ish years ago was the fact that we had a lot more simple product stack versus today. For instance, when I did this last time, I believe I was running a Z77 3700K, which Ivy Bridge, as you know, was kind of like the top dog, and then you had your i7s, which were hyper-threading, you had your i5s, which were not, i3s, which were not, a couple SKUs of each, and then we had FX, which was 4-core, 6-core, 8-core, no SMT, no hyper-threading, very basic, very easy to compare. The problem now is on the CPU side of things, the battle heating up ever since Ryzen launched with the 1800X and down, the competition has just been getting fierce with more SKUs, filling in the gaps, filling in the price gaps, the performance gaps, Intel doing the same thing, Intel actually having annual launches once again, some of them being less than a year apart, has created some serious confusion in the marketplace in terms of what the direct comparisons should be. It's something we've struggled with as we've done CPU comparisons, as we've done gaming comparisons. It's becoming to the point to where we don't know exactly where to line them up. Do we do it core for core? Because when we do that, we have the CPUs might do this, but the pricing structure more or less does that. So it becomes very difficult to compare. So that is why, for the sake of this video, we are kind of doing core for core because that's the best way that we can determine what an apples to apples comparison would be in terms of power draw. 8-core, 16-thread Ryzen 2700X versus a 9900K, which is also 8-core, 16-thread, albeit at a much faster clock and turbo clock. For GPU, on the other hand, it's a little bit easier to sort of line those up because the Radeon 7, which is the best card that you can get right now from AMD for mainstream and even productivity, being at, this is the top price point. The problem is the top price point for AMD does not meet the top price point for NVIDIA. That slots more or less against a 2080, whereas the 2080 Ti costs approximately $400 more, and then obviously gives you more performance that goes along with that. So even though I have a 2080 Ti sitting on the table, we are going to use 2080 versus a Radeon 7, and then a 2080 Ti for shits and giggles. And then I already explained to you how we're gonna do the CPU. We're not talking about Threadripper, we're not talking about X299 or any of those, because what I just explained in terms of how difficult it is to match everything up wasn't even including the Extreme platform. The nice thing about AMD moving forward with Ryzen 3 or Ryzen 2 3000 series is the fact that there are more SKUs available for mainstream, meaning you're not having to then take into account the cost of motherboards and extra RAM channels and all that sort of stuff. So here's what you need to figure out is, before you can determine how much something's gonna cost you to run, you need to know how much power it uses and how much you're using it. So for instance, I reached out on Twitter because I thought, man, I've got about 520,000 followers there. That's a huge data set if even a fraction of those people respond. So I put out a tweet saying, hey guys, on average, how much do you game per day? Like how many hours? As expected, it was a pretty wide range, but I saw a lot of, I don't game at all anymore, I'm too busy, which unfortunately doesn't really help, but they don't know the purpose of this video, so that was still a fair answer. To some people gaming more than 10 hours per day, which definitely could rack up the amount of costs in terms of wattage pricing and that sort of stuff. So this is going to be an interesting data set. What I found was the median tend to be between 3 to 4 hours. So for the sake of calculations today, we're using 3.5 hours of gaming time for our tests. The other thing that gets a little bit convoluted here is trying to determine CPU power draw because of its constant fluctuating load, where the GPU kind of tends to do nothing unless you're gaming. So GPU is a lot easier to calculate, so that's why we're going to go ahead and start there. Now using Guru 3D, I am going to put our link to our sources as well as putting on screen their charts and stuff so you can see. This is data sets that we've been getting from the internet. We've looked at a bunch of different sources and not just our own because we want to see kind of what the median is. That way we're not just going off one data set. Not to mention Guru 3D puts a list of their specs for the system. They use the same system on everything, so it keeps it very consistent. So for graphics, and with them being Guru 3D, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right, that they would have graphics charts. The Radeon 7 at 3.5 hours per day, using an average of 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And yeah, some of you might look at that and go, whoa, that's expensive. If you live here in Southern California in the summertime, you could go, wow, I wish I was only paying 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So once again, we had to kind of find a middle ground to call, fair. So at 3.5 hours per day, the Radeon 7 is going to cost you approximately $4.78 per month to run, or $57.34 per year. Compared to a 2080, it's going to cost you $3.68 per month to run and $44.10 per year, or a difference of $13.24 per year. That's kind of a wash if you think about it, because the Radeon 7, although the HBM2 and the Vega architecture and all that stuff has been known to be a bit power hungry because it has a lot of heat, needs a lot of cooling, and that heat's generated obviously by power draw. One of the things I like to do though when it comes to cost calculations is kind of average them over 5 years, because I find that 5 years is kind of the time frame when a lot of people will upgrade their systems. Yes, I know many of you are running much older systems than that, and yes, there are people out there that do annual upgrades, so they don't care about the power cost because they're never gonna make it back anyway. So at $13 times 5 years, obviously you're talking about $65 in cost difference between the Radeon 7 versus the 2080. Now, if you spent that extra $65 on a graphics card, guess what? You wouldn't have gone anywhere higher than a 2080 because the next bump up is $400. So at this point, that's why we're saying it's kind of a wash. It makes no difference because directly comparable in price, very comparable in performance, and over 5 years at a $65 power difference, I still would call that one pretty dang close. But what about CPUs? Well, the CPUs, this is interesting. AMD has always been known as the space heater. If you're cold in the wintertime, get yourself an AMD CPU. It'll keep you nice and toasty. That's always been the joke, right? The AMD heater. Well, the 9900K, we had a hard time finding a lot of, I guess, comparable data sets when it comes to load and all that sort of stuff, because we found a very wide range of testing in terms of power draw. Some people were normalizing by removing idle wattage and giving us just load wattage. Some people were measuring from the wall. Some people were overclocking. So what we found here was we're using TechSpot here and their particular charts for Blender Blender Gooseberry and Handbrake. So obviously CPU transcoding in Handbrake and then CPU rendering in Blender. Blender does use GPU as well, but obviously they're doing CPU test. So the 9900K in Handbrake pulled 255 watts system wattage, that's total system wattage, important to put out there, 3.5 hours a day, would cost you $4.07 a month or $48.90 per year to run. The 2700X, ironically, considerably less power draw, is pulling 209 watts from the wall for this whole total system, or $3.34 a month, $40.08 a year, or a difference of $7 and some change on the math per year. Now here's the important part. The CPUs are not comparable in terms of pricing like it was with the GPU. The 2700X, and yes, I know this sounds like an AMD sponsored product video. It's not. This is Jay sponsored. This is my stuff. We're talking about this because this is an argument that I'm tired of seeing people say without any sort of experience in the subject matter that cost to run the system can make or break the difference in terms of where the value is. Because as you can see, a difference of $7 and some change per year between a 2700X and a 9900K does not make up for the 40% extra cost of a 9900K versus a 2700X. This is all I'm doing there. This is the point of today's video, is to get you thinking this way. There are certain things that are okay to consider. There are certain things that are not okay to consider when it comes to the true value of a product. Had these been the same price even, the value would still technically be with the 2700X if you're using that argument. But we all know the 9900K is approximately 10 to 15% faster depending on the workload. In fact, in Cinebench, it was a 2038 score versus an 1808, or approximately 12.7% difference. So As you can see right here, if you kept both systems for 5 years, at $7 a year difference, we're talking a difference of $35. And power cost of AMD, or Intel, wow. See how ingrained we were to believe AMD is faster? And I just did that on myself, because that was the case. It used to be the case. IPC was terrible, power draw was terrible on FX. That all changed with Ryzen. Now the other thing I want to talk about here is that's kind of not a fair test. And what I mean by that is most people are not running their CPUs at 100% load for 3.5 hours a day. Because we've shown on this channel many times, gaming load on CPU unless bottlenecked is not 100%. It tends to sit around 40 to 60%, depending on the game. Games that are very GPU bound are going to be a lot less intrusive on the CPU load, which means even lower loads on the CPU, which means an even narrower gap when it comes to power draw. So that's good news for Intel, not so much for AMD, but at the end of the day, we still have a 40% cost difference between the two. The point of this conversation is to tell you that because you're not at 100% load, it doesn't matter what the power draw on CPU is going to be. Unless we're comparing something like an i3 to a W3175X, which obviously would not be a very fair comparison because we'd be talking more than 1,000 watts on the CPU versus like 50 watts on an i3. So at the end of the day, if you keep your system for 5 years, usually the cost savings is not enough to even bump you up into the next tier. That's been the case as long as we've had this CPU battle going on. But that's all getting ready to change, because one of the things we're still waiting to see with Zen 2, or technically 3rd gen Ryzen, I guess, I don't know, however you want to call it, is improved power draw. Improved IPC, improved power draw. And a lot of that comes from the fact that it's running on 7nm process and not 14++ FinFET like Intel still is. And even when Intel gets its 10nm going on desktop, we could still see a better power draw coming from AMD versus Intel. The smaller the process, the less power draw, which is something that is, kind of been Murphy's Law and all that stuff for a long time. Did I say Murphy's Law? That's not Murphy's Law, huh? Moore's Law. I knew it started with an M. But Jay, what's the whole point of this video? The point of this video is just to say, buy what works for you. Seriously, the most ignorant comment a person can make is the power draw argument. It means anyone that says that, it means they haven't done the math. It means they haven't actually sat down and thought about it. So honestly, guys, at the end of the day, we have to wait and see what's going to happen with the next architecture from AMD. If we see these IPCs come up, and on 7nm, it's matching and exceeding possibly the 9900K, as just arbitrarily throwing it out there, the value is already with AMD in terms of price of the CPU. It's already there in terms of power draw. And you know what? Are you willing to pay 40% more for 10 to 15% more performance? Plenty of people do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's your choice, and that's the whole point of today's video. Ignore the power draw conversation and go right with the performance conversation and get where the performance and the dollar amount makes sense for your wallet. All right, guys, this is just one of those topics that I decided to do a talking head on because of the amount of comments I've seen over the brutal battle that is taking place amongst the fanboys regarding AMD and Intel. Rightfully so. I mean, it's okay to like what you like, but I think what's happened here is that AMD's been the underdog for so long and they're getting ready to possibly be top dog. I think a lot of people just can't help the smack talk. Makes things kind of interesting, I guess. You guys can sound off down below, have all the fights you want, I guess. You're going to regardless of what I say. So yeah, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.